All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Park, and today I'm just so excited to spend a little bit of time with you all, virtually at least, to talk to you about one of my favorite relational leadership skills, which we call a one-to-one meeting, or you'll sometimes hear us call it a relational meeting. And it's one of the most frequently used practices of any relational leader, and it's going to come up time and time again in subsequent sessions. So we'll really try to master it here together. But before we dive in, I just want to share with you all why it's my favorite relational leadership skill. And that starts with a game you've probably heard it before called Two Truths and a Lie. And if you haven't played it before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say three things in a moment. Two of them will be truths and one of them will be a lie. I want you to guess which are which. Okay, so here goes. So let's do this. Number one, for as long as I can remember, I never wanted to be a physician. Two, I nearly dropped out of medical school. And three, I decided to stay in medical school only after learning I had a knack for being a healthcare provider. All right, two truths and one lie. Which is which? Got them in your head? All right, so let me tell you a quick story that'll get you to the answers. So the truth is, I came to a career in healthcare through what I like to think of as the back door. So I was a failed filmmaker, and I was just scrambling to pay the rent, pay the bills. And so I was just scrambling around for a job. And a friend of mine was like, hey, Brian, there's a job that just opened up at a diabetes clinic that I heard about. And I stumbled completely backwards into a job as a care coordinator for a diabetes clinic in Harlem, New York City, which is where I was living. And there I worked on this really great program for teenagers with type 2 diabetes, which you typically see in folks who are a little bit older. And I partnered with teens and their families on the social determinants of health in their lives. And as you can imagine, there was so much intergenerational poverty, broken families, bullying, obesity. And I just fell in love with that work. And somewhere along the way, I got this notion in my head that this is what healthcare is, right? And this is exactly what I wanted to do. So I did all my prereqs, took all my exams, applied to medical school, and I was really lucky, got back in to medical school back home in Minnesota. And I still remember it was about 1 month into medical school. I was sitting in a large, dark auditorium, and I was sitting in biochemistry class. And they were teaching about the Krebs cycle, which is like how cells create energy. And there was this moment where this feeling overcame me. And that feeling was, I have made a huge mistake. A huge mistake. In that moment, what I felt was this huge emotional and professional chasm between the values that brought me into medicine and the content I was being taught up on the screen every day. And the truth is, friends, I struggled emotionally, I struggled academically with my grades, and I thought I was actually going to drop out, if not be kicked out, in the winter. And that's when I met Dr. Song. Let me tell you about Dr. Song. Dr. Song was an internist who had started a street outreach program for folks experiencing houselessness, which was an interest of mine at the time. So I decided at that moment that I needed to understand how he was doing what he did. So later that winter, I got really lucky, got to meet up with Dr. Song over lunch. It was this greasy bowl of kung pao chicken in this hole-in-the-wall Chinese restaurant. And I let him know that I was thinking of dropping out of medical school. And when I said that, Dr. Song, he was listening intently. He put down his chopsticks onto his greasy plate. He looked up and he said, Brian, I know you're saying you want to drop out of medical school, but why did you ever want to get into medical school in the first place? And honestly, almost like a reflex, I gave the response I gave to everyone when I was asked a question like that. You know, the usual, right? I want to help people. I want to fix a broken system. I want to make communities healthier, right? Dr. Song, he looked at me straight in the eyes. He said, Brian, I want you to look around us. Everyone is here because they want to do those things. Help people, right? Help fix a broken system. What I asked was, I'm wondering why you, of all the things in the world you could have done, did this, come to medical school. Why? And in that moment, honestly, I froze. I had been asked this question a million times in my life, but I'd never really been asked that question. Not in that way, you know what I'm saying? So over the course of the next 45 minutes, as Dr. Song was asking me about myself, about my why, it all came just pouring out. I told him about all the patients and families I had worked with in Harlem, the ways that they had changed my perspectives on health and justice and life. I told him about the ways my own family had experienced injustices at the hands of the healthcare system. And I told him about the ways I wanted to improve not just healthcare, but really health. And so at the end of our discussion, Dr. Song, he wrote down a name and number on a sheet of paper and said, Brian, I really want you to call this person. And when I did, that person was someone who was working to organize communities experiencing houselessness in Minneapolis. And for the next 3.5 years in medical school, I learned about community organizing. And ever since that moment, I was hooked. I had found my purpose and I've never looked back. And it's work that I continue to do like to this day. So in that vein, Dr. Song really changed the trajectory of my life. He was the first person in 6 to 7 months of medical school to really sit me down, ask to hear more about me. And that to me, at that particular moment in my life, was something that was extremely powerful. That someone in just a matter of 45 minutes could change your life forever. I mean, think about it. From those 45 minutes, I got 3 amazing gifts. 1, I identified a purpose for myself. 2, I expanded my network of people doing work I was interested in that shaped my career forever. And 3, I would say most importantly, I strengthened my relationship with Dr. Song. He honestly became a mentor for me for my entire career until his passing unexpectedly 2 years ago. And so that was a gift, and it all happened because of 45 minutes that Dr. Song gave to me that still reverberates into what I do today. So let's go back to the beginning. 2 truths and a lie, right? Well, here's the truth. I definitely, for as long as I could remember, never wanted to be a healthcare provider. 2, I definitely nearly dropped out of medical school. But here's the lie. I only decided to stay in medical school after learning I had a knack not for being a provider, but for community organizing for health. And that was all thanks to a 45-minute discussion with a mentor over a greasy plate of Kung Pao chicken. And so that's why today I want to share with each of you about this skill that my mentor, Dr. Song, exercised so effectively on me, called a one-to-one meeting. Review some best practices for that skill and start empowering to feel that you can start making a profound impact on other people's lives too, just like Dr. Song did for me. Sound good? All right, so I always like to say that the relational leadership domains that you see here are the overarching roadmap for your RLI journey that we're embarking on together. The competencies that you'll be developing as a result of the skills that we reviewed together in this course. So in my mind, narrative leadership, which you just learned about, and one-to-one meetings, those skills are both rooted in the self-management, that manage self, and foster teamwork domains, right? If you think about it, narrative leadership that you learned with Matt Lewis puts us in broadcast mode, where we reconnect with our values, our experiences, our motivations, and through sharing our stories publicly, we put ourselves, our values out there for other people to jump on board with, to connect with us. And then one-to-ones, it puts us in receive mode, where we increase our awareness of other people's values, their experiences, their motivations, through listening their stories. So if narrative leadership is all about putting us in broadcast mode, where we're being courageous about ourselves, our values, one-to-ones is going to flip the switch into receive mode. We're being curious about our others, their values. So hopefully during the narrative leadership session, you got a sense of the impact that reflecting on and communicating your values can have on yourself and on others. One-to-one meetings then allows us to foster and fortify teamwork by helping others reflect on and articulate their values. And in that process, build a sense of collective identity through shared values within our team. So here's a slide that's going to be familiar to you from our very first evening together, Intro to Relational Leadership, regarding the evolution of leadership, right? So most of our meetings, if you think about it, serves to perpetuate values on that left-hand side, right? To really center our work. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Let's dive in to get it done as quickly as possible, right? And don't get me wrong, there is a time and a place for that because there's so much on our collective plates. But what would a meeting look like if we were to support those values on the right-hand side, right? To put our colleagues, our teammates at the center, to understand another's values, passions, motivations. It's not for every meeting, but if we put that sort of meeting at the foundation of our teams, might we then have colleagues that are more engaged and thus more successful in their work? And that's what one-to-one meetings aim to do. So let's talk about that. So first, take a moment to reflect on the last, let's say 2 to 3 meetings that you've had with one other person. Last 2 to 3 meetings that you've had with one other person. And what I want you to do is reflect on what was the basic purpose of those meetings, right? Last 2 to 3 meetings with one person. What's the basic purpose of those meetings? I'm willing to wager, could be wrong, that on the surface, explicitly, the purpose of those meetings were one of 4 things, okay? To update on progress, to advise, to train, or to make decisions together, right? I imagine it was about one of those 4 things. And what often gets overlooked in that process is that those are all the explicit purpose of meetings, right? It's what's on the surface. But if we were to look under that surface, look under the hood implicitly of all of those meetings, I would actually argue the purpose of those meetings were always about one other thing, always, whether we were thinking about it or not. And that's to build a relationship. It was signaling in that meeting something about how we work together, whether that's a colleague, a trainee, a supervisor. Everything we were doing in that meeting was signaling on a spectrum, either cared deeply about who you are as a person and as a colleague, which is a relational lens, or at another extreme, I only care about you in regards to the work you can do for me, which is transactional, right? Work-oriented lens. So like all things in RLI, I'm sure you're picking up on this theme. What we're hoping to do is that for all of us, these tools help us make the implicit explicit, right? The important things often forgotten, like relationships. We want to bring them to the surface, make the invisible visible. Or to return to our first night, right? How do we pay attention to and shift the water of how we just do things as status quo and try to break ourselves out of that? And again, this one-to-one meeting, it's not meant to replace all other meetings you ever have again, but instead to add to your repertoire of types of meetings to help foster connection and relationships as a leader. So a one-to-one meeting, let's talk about it. One-to-one meetings are from a rich history of community organizing. And what it's serving to do is really try to bring vastly different sets of people together and work together around a set of shared values. That's really where it comes from. So a one-to-one meeting, I would define it as an intentional face-to-face meeting with another individual to develop an authentic connection. And the purpose really is threefold. The first is to listen for stories, right? How do we listen for the choice points in other people's journeys that helps us identify their values, right? And these usually happen through why questions. The second is to understand motivations, or what makes people tick. What gets them up in the morning, right? What keeps them up at night? And the last one is to build a relationship, right? To leave that meeting feeling that we're closer and more connected for it than before that meeting. That you bring value to me beyond the work that you do, and you bring value as a person who is working towards the same work goal as me. So let's dig into this a little bit more, this one-to-one meeting. So here are the details. What are the components of a one-to-one meeting? So these are rough estimates, but I know sometimes structures can be helpful for all of us. So the first 10% is the initial connection, right? Have you ever been in a meeting where you wonder, okay, we've been sitting here for 20 minutes. Like, what does this person want? Where are they going? Did they want something from me? And I always hate that kind of feeling in a meeting, because then I spend half an hour worrying about, like, where are we going on this? So the first 10%, that initial connection, start with a check-in, why you want to meet, and what you're hoping to cover, so that folks just understand where you're going. You know, maybe it'll look like, hey, Marcel, I know that we often check in about updates on how we want to structure and organize these RLI sessions. But today, I was just realizing if we could take some time, because it's been a while since we've checked in on just how you're feeling about your professional growth in general. And if we have time, I'd love to chat about how we can make sure we're creating a fulfilling work environment for you, right? So just an initial connection. The middle 70% are open-ended questions to understand what motivates that person. In a way, think of it as helping that person elicit their story of self, right? What are you passionate about right now? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Why is that? Or I'd love to hear a story about the moment you decided you wanted to do this work that we do together. So as you can tell, this is all very different from a social chit chat update, right? Like, it's not about how's your weekend or what do you like to do for fun? What's your family like? But really trying to understand the values and motivations of this person. It's important to note here, as you'll see on that kind of asterisk, this is a reciprocal process where you are sharing your own values and motivations too, right? As a rule of thumb, we like to say, they do 2/3 of the talking, you still do 1/3 of the talking. Well, why might that be? Why might that be? Why do you still have to be reciprocal? And what I invite you to do is think about a job interview, right? Think about what a job interview feels like when one person you're sitting across the table from asks you all the questions, right? A list of questions. How does that feel? Really intimidating, right? Can be off-putting. But when there's reciprocity, what it does is it humanizes both sides, right? I get to know you, you get to know me, builds a relationship, and it gives opportunities in that moment to calibrate the vulnerability bar together, right? Like, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. I want to meet you where you're at, right? Like, I want to tell you a little bit about something about me too, my experiences. So, and the last 20% is next steps. Maybe that's an ask. And I don't mean that as a transactional ask that you come into that meeting, you're just waiting that whole meeting of, I just need to ask this person about this. But if there's going to be an ask, I mean a relationship-based one determined by what you learned in the one-to-one. Maybe it's, gosh, Marcel, I'm so glad we checked in. I had no idea you were so passionate about racial justice work right now. So I'd actually love it if you could attend a committee I'm trying to convene and get together at our department right now on that topic, right? Just emerges organically out of that one-to-one. So it's really about identifying how that person's motivations intersects with the work that you're doing. And for Dr. Song, if you think about his one-to-one with me, for him, it was learning that I'm interested in health equity and systems change work. That got him to thinking, gosh, I want to connect Brian to a local community organizer. And of course, let's just normalize 100% A-okay if at the end of your one-to-one meeting, you decide there is no ask. I'm really glad that we built a relationship. I got to know you better. Doesn't have to be an ask, right? Just take value, take stock of the relationship that was built, of just understanding your colleague better and their values, what makes them tick. So sometimes I feel like I have a tendency to over-explain a one-to-one. I think the easiest way to understand and learn a one-to-one meeting is to see one in action. So let's watch one together. And the situation you're about to see, Callie invited Alexander to do a one-to-one. And from what I understand, this was not scripted, pre-planned. This was actually a one-to-one meeting that they had that they recorded. So thank you, Callie and Alexander. And as you watch, I want you to have your antennas up for three things, okay? So watch with these three questions in mind. Number one is, what did we learn about Alexander? As Callie's talking to him, what did we learn about Alexander? Two, was Callie reciprocal? And what did that seem to do when she was reciprocal with Alexander? And three, where could Callie have gone even deeper? Right? What questions could she have asked? So what did we learn about Alexander? Was Callie reciprocal? And where could Callie have gone deeper? All right, take it away, Alexander and Callie.
Alexander, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
Doing okay.
Yeah.
It's been
Yeah.
a year.
It really has.
It's been a week.
Yeah.
The smoke is finally clearing up.
I'm glad for that too. It's been, yeah, just a heavy burden to have all of that top of everything else. But you have some good news, right? I heard that you just got a new position.
I did. Yeah. I officially joined the RLI team.
That's so exciting.
Yeah. It is like in a way a little anticlimactic because I've worked with you for 3 years as part of the RLI team, but it's really nice to finally officially join the team. Yeah.
So tell me more about the role.
That's a loaded question because we're still figuring parts of that out. So part of it is taking the reins from Brian as the course director and kind of overseeing the aspects of running the RLI course. So trying to fill those big shoes. And then there's this newer part of that role of community manager. Down. Sorry. Rocky, down. Of course, somebody on the door. Yeah.
Do you want me to go back and tell me about the role?
Sure. Let's do that.
Okay, so tell me more about the role.
Oh, man. So that's a bit of a loaded question because we're still figuring it out. But so part of it is starting as the RLI course director, which means I'll be taking the reins from Brian and running the day-to-day aspects of the RLI courses.
Mhm.
And then there's this other part of the role, which is kind of a newer piece, and that's the community manager piece. So figuring out how to steward this RLI or relational leadership community as more and more people get involved, and trying to figure out what that will look like moving forward.
Mhm. So lots of unknowns, but what are you most excited about?
Ooh, I mean, I have big shoes to fill with Brian stepping down from the course director role, but excited to carry on his legacy a little bit. But I'm really excited about the community aspect. I've always felt like the backbone of relational leadership is the people we all get to interact with, the relationships we build along the way. And so I'm excited about getting to formalize that aspect a little bit more
Mhm.
moving forward. And I think the unknown part of it is a little bit exciting because there's a bit of a blank slate to build off of there.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just curious. I mean, I can make some assumptions, but I don't know if I really know why you made that choice to change job paths and officially be a part of the RLI team.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I should probably have a canned answer for my interview a while back, but um, why? I think we've got to know each other a little bit over the course of doing RLI together. I don't know if I've told you my story of self at all, but I think like at its core, um, RLI represents the best of community to me, um, and going back to um, going way back to early on, I think cultivating community um, was a was something that became very valuable to me, and seeing how community how fragile it could be, uh, and how powerful it could be. Um, so getting to step into an organization that values relationships and community, and getting to be a part of building those things, and hopefully making them more integral into healthcare and making healthcare better that way is a huge part of why I wanted to join the organization.
I'm really curious, what does community mean to you?
Man, all kinds of good questions today. uh, Community, yeah, it's more than just a group of people. Like at its base, it is, right. It's a group of people, but it's how those people interact, how we work together, how we play together, how we support each other. Um, it's what we enable each other to do. Um, if it's just as a community, believing in each other and seeing the best in each other, and that enabling you to go out and do great things, or if that's as a community all coming together and working together towards a common goal.
Mhm.
But I think at its core, community to me is about a group of people who have common cause and values and rally around each other to bring out the best in each other.
Mhm. And I heard you mention that you really want to bring that into healthcare. I'm curious about why that's important to you.
Yeah. Um, my background is public health, and I enjoy that big lens, that population health view, and it's really easy to get bogged down in the what's wrong with healthcare now. Go down the laundry list of statistics and pick out like people are disconnected. Outcomes aren't what we would hope they would be. Care is inequitable, and it's sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees, but you get bogged down in these almost seemingly hopeless issues, and so it becomes a like I lost my train of thought.
Okay.
I was going somewhere with that, but remind me the question.
Why bring this focus of community into healthcare?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's easy to get bogged down in these big problems, and having people around us who remind us that that things can be better, and then having people to dream with and strategize with, and hopefully push each other towards solutions is tremendously important. Because I think we have to get beyond the myth of like the one great person who solves everything.
Yeah.
And the only alternative to that is doing it together.
Gosh, I want to give you so many snaps. Wow, that really resonates with me, and I feel like when I think about my time at the Relational Leadership Institute, and what I've been able to bring back into my own career at Ocean, those are the same things. That like really recognizing that we can't solve these complex problems on our own, and there's so much value in bringing groups of people together who have this toolkit of relationship skills to be able to tackle some really meaty issues. And I am just so excited for you as you embark on this next chapter and being the course director. And I'd really love to continue to stay in touch and check in on how that goes. I'm thinking about starting up a relational leadership program through Ocean, and I bet you're going to have so much good insights from this experience that I could really learn from. So really appreciate that, and hope we can do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Callie. I really look forward to hearing more about how that goes, and I'd love to stay in touch.
Yes, let's do it. Great. Thanks.
All right, so let's just debrief together what we just saw. A really great one-to-one meeting with Callie and Alexander. So let's just think about this for a moment. Do you feel like you know Alexander's motivations, like the why behind them? I would say, yeah, like he believes connection is this universal antidote that all humans need to thrive, and it's rooted in his work with refugee populations, right? And then would you say that trust was built between Callie and Alexander? I would say yes again. You know, it seemed like they had parallel patterns that they saw of isolation in their work, Callie's work, Alexander's work, and they wanted to find a time to debrief that even more together. And I guess the other question I would ask is, did Callie seem to be genuinely curious about Alexander, right? Could you feel it? And I would say yes again. You know, Callie does such a great job of asking, and just knowing her, she says this a lot, I'm really struck by, or, I was curious about, right? Those words that signal authentic curiosity, makes that curiosity explicit. So let's break it down a little bit, what we just saw. How did Callie do it? So she had a very clear lead-in, right? She acknowledged, yeah, I know we get to see each other pretty frequently for RLI 6. Let's get that out of the way, though. It just struck me that I hadn't had a chance to check in with you about how you're transitioning into your new role, right? So she just was very clear about, I know we don't always have this kind of conversation that we see each other a lot, but I want to dive into this a little bit with you. And then, I thought that she was very reciprocal too. She said, I've been a part of RLI for 3 years, and I'm curious about the vision you have for community manager, right? She made that RLI connection. And Alexander cast his vision a little bit. And Callie also went a little bit deeper. She said, I want to try to bring RLI into clinics too in my workplace that has networks of community health centers and help them to have more well-developed teams, right? So she was also forthcoming about this passion that she had for relational leadership. And, there's a highly active listening piece with Callie too, right? She said, I'm struck by this relationship building piece. It takes me a lot of energy to do. And, she did this really helpful framework that we'll go through a little bit together. But her leading question, if you remember, it was something like, what is it that you're stepping into again? And then she said, why? Why start there with relationships, right? And I'll be honest, Alexander's response, it was kind of like the response that we always give, right? He kind of gave the surface level response about like, oh, I think relationships are important. Relationship buildings are important. So what did Callie do? Do you remember? Callie asked a question. She said, can I dig deeper there? Why is that important to you? She asked it again. And what did that do? If you remember, she asked, can I dig a little bit deeper? Why is that important to you? And Alexander kind of told a mini story of himself about his work with refugee communities, folks feeling really isolated in that community, and then the impact, right? The outcome was connection and community seemed to be a big antidote in his experience. And he sees that same pattern of isolation playing out in the healthcare community. So they did have an ask in this case that they closed with. Callie said, gosh, I'd love to talk to you more about these discussions that you had with this RLI community and how they're building teams and how do you bring them into teams that aren't as familiar with them. And, this was used as a teaching tool, but it was all done in 10 minutes too, right? And traditional one-to-one meetings, we think of as like 30 to 40 minutes. So there's a lot that you can go into. I do want to say as a learning tool, I think there's always room for improvement, right? We do plus deltas of every session. I want to do a plus delta of this. So I've talked a lot about, well, I think there's always opportunities to do one-to-ones better. So one, I think there's an opportunity where Callie could have gone deeper, right? Not just why communities, but I'm left wondering, gosh, Alexander, there's so many places to do community building work, right? You could be a social worker, you could be a community organizer, you can even be a community organizer with refugee communities. And yet, why RLI? Like, what drew you to community building in this particular space in health systems? And I think that that's something that Callie could have dug even a little bit deeper in. Then I thought that there were some critical choice points of being maybe even a little bit more reciprocal. When Alexander was being vulnerable with his story of working with refugee communities, I thought maybe Callie could have met him there emotionally a little bit more, right? Like, I've never worked with refugee communities myself, but as you're sharing, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a colleague in a rural health clinic in my workplace, and they were feeling isolated in times of COVID too. And even though I live in Portland in an urban area, I felt the connection with this rural colleague and moved by how much of their day-to-day existence depends on connection with others, right? I'm curious if that is what you experienced in your work with refugee communities, right? Something where she could kind of draw upon her own experience of, gosh, I know what you mean when you share why connection is important, why isolation is so hard, right? Digging into that. But again, that's nitpicking, trying to really lift up deltas of how you might think about, gosh, how do we even do this better? So something I just want to acknowledge is that sometimes structure is really helpful for folks, especially as we're learning something. So I just wanted to share example questions that might be a framework that helps you out a little bit more in getting deeper in our one-to-one meetings. I think of this as the what, how, why framework, the what, how, why framework. And let me explain this to you. It's really about asking, what are you up to? How did you get into that work? And then why? And then like Callie did, asking why again. All right, let me dig a little deeper. Why? Right? Because sometimes it takes people a little bit to get to that space. Because we're used to having conversations up here. We're talking about conversations a little bit deeper. So, I often think about how we have kind of these resume CV type conversations that Matt Lewis talked about, right? What experiences did you have? What work did you use to do? What else are you working on right now? But we don't always get at those why questions, those experiences that are important, help shape our values even to today. And one-to-one meetings are intended to help us get to that space, right? It's the difference between if I sat down with Dr. Song, I said, Dr. Song, I'm interested in health equity because I worked in a diabetes clinic in Harlem, New York. And What if I said, you know, Dr. Song, I'm interested in health equity because when I worked in a diabetes clinic before med school, I saw my own life in the lives of teenagers with type 2 diabetes. Even though I was nothing like them, I saw myself in them and I wanted to help change the path of those lives. So let's talk about applications. Where do you see this fitting into your own work, whether that's as a leader with formal power, capital L leader, or as a team member who's building your informal power, lowercase l leader. So some food for thought for you. So this is a seminal piece done by Dr. Tate Schoenfeld back when he was with Mayo Clinic. I believe he's with Stanford University. He's done a ton of work on well-being and burnout now. Back when he was with Mayo, he was interested in researching what percent of one's work week should be engaged in work that someone finds, quote unquote, most meaningful to them to not feel burnt out. So let me pitch that question to you. If you had to guess, what percentage of your work needs to be, quote unquote, most meaningful to you for you to not feel burnt out? What percent would you guess? Think to yourself. Do you have a number in your head? All right, so Dr. Schoenfeld's team in this research found that if about 20% of one's day is devoted to work that feels most meaningful, they're significantly less likely to burn out. You might remember Google had kind of a 1 day a week where folks could work on kind of a personal project for them. It was designed around this exact line of thinking. And what I take from that is not all of our day, not all of our work needs to be devoted to something meaningful. Just a small portion, 20%. So what I hope is that if you're a capital L leader with formal power, a one-to-one meeting could be a tool that better equips you to identify what is most meaningful to a colleague, to my direct reports, right? Being able to identify what can I do to try to get that number closer to 20% of something that's most meaningful to someone, or even drawing that out in someone's work. Some other applications that you can think about. Number one is connecting, right? We've talked about psychological safety. Understanding others' values communicates you care about them beyond their professional role. It enhances trust, communication. So as you build new teams for new projects, new initiatives, becomes a way to signal immediately with new team members that this new team, we're going to value connection, relationships, understand each other's shared values. So it's just inculcating it into the culture from the very beginning. Number two is checking in. Maybe you have a team already. So it's just about creating new patterns of interrelating, right? New patterns of interrelating on existing teams. Like Matt Lewis said, we've been socialized to lead with our CV, our own and others. What do you do, right? What would it feel like to unlearn that part and just be open to the most human parts of someone we work with every day already, right? Like asking why. So why do you do this work? I have worked with you for 6 years. I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this. I don't know why. Well, why do you like to do this work? And the last one is empowering. You know how we create like mental maps of organizational structures, like leaders, committees, committee leaders, subcommittees, subcommittee leaders? What would it be like to do a mental map of people's values, right? Understanding what people are most passionate about. And when we do that, we can say, gosh, we should really work together on this. Even though we're not on the same project, let's think about opportunities to work together on our shared passion over social justice work. Or, you know what? You should really connect with this other person. I had a one-to-one with them 6 months ago and I almost forgotten about it, but they're also really interested in this kind of research, right? Having a relational mental map that can really be empowering to folks. So all of these approaches are ways to build relationships, maintain connections on a team that are values and relationship centered, right? That third evolution of leadership. And functionally, as you're going to see in subsequent sessions, one-to-ones can serve as preventive methods for conflict, right? We're going to share with you conflict is inevitable. It's a positive, inevitable thing on teams, but we can help mitigate the impact and frequency of conflict by doing a lot of things like maintaining psychological safety, doing narrative leadership, doing one-to-one meetings, because it helps us give the benefit of the doubt to folks when we know each other. It's not to say that it eliminates conflict from happening, but it can mitigate its impact because there's a foundational trust and relationship there. So what I'd like to do is take some time to consider how you might approach it, right? So a little bit of homework for you to consider. What I would say is start with a one-to-one and start with some training wheels, right? Try this new meeting out with a peer, a close colleague that you really trust, or even a friend, right? Try to do that what, how, why framework and just get to that why. You'll feel it emotionally when you get there, that why of, oh, that's why you do this work. And the traditional one-to-one meetings, like I said, are about 30 to 40 minutes. Find ways to sprinkle even 5 minutes, right? Getting to those why moments, and just maybe you're having a meeting and just saying, gosh, I just want to take 5 minutes. Why do you do this work? And try to elicit other people's stories during an already scheduled meeting. So you might be amazed by what you discover if you do that. All right, so I hope that was helpful for you. Quick reminder too, just to normalize, I do one-to-ones all the time. I go through my week, I set weekly goals for myself and how many I'm gonna do with existing team members, new contacts that I'm meeting. And I'll share with you honestly, sometimes they go really well, and still to this day, even though I've been doing this for years, they go disastrously. After all of these years, I'm still absolutely bombing them sometimes. So that's a humbling reminder to me that one-to-ones are a continual learning practice. So keep trying it out, right? These early stages, don't be a figure skater, be a skateboarder, just dive into it. Like we always say, if you have any plus deltas as you've moved through this video, please share them with us. We're always looking to improve these, especially pre-recorded sessions. This is the very first time we've ever had to record one-to-ones. So please let us know any pluses, any deltas that you're taking away. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I love talking to folks about one-to-one meetings. Let me know if we can support you. All right, take care. See you around. Bye.